I'd like you to stop for a moment. And I want you to think of the names of people that you know that are models of commitment and faith for you. I think of Dorothy Day. Born in Brooklyn, lived a rather bohemian lifestyle. In fact, she was called one of the first Catholic hippies of the 70s. She was married and divorced, had an abortion, lived with a man she loved, had another child. But in the process, she became acquainted with the social teaching of the church. She recognized the very first principle, the dignity and respect of all life, even at the moment of conception. This spiritual awakening led her on a path that was so much different than the life she had experienced previously. She began to be very conscious of the poor and the needy and the hungry. She worked hard. The last public appearance of her life was made on August 6, 1976, at the Eucharistic Congress in Philadelphia. She spoke of the love of God for humanity, of being able to focus your life and find your strength in the Eucharist as a Eucharistic people, taking Jesus' real presence out into the community. I think of Andrea Riccardi, who was born in 1950 in Rome, and at 18 years old, a high school student gathered many of his friends together, and they committed themselves to a community called the Community of St. Egidio. They committed themselves and provided a refuge for the old and the elderly and the homeless within the city of Rome. They created a hospice for AIDS patients and those who were forgotten on the streets, those who slept on the streets. That mission of their community continues today. The Eucharist as the strength and the source of the community's life. And it enables them to renew themselves each and every day to do the work of Christ and to go out into the community as the real presence of the Lord. I think of Archbishop Oscar Romero. He was born in 1917 in San Miguel, El Salvador. In 1977, he was appointed Archbishop of El Salvador, to the surprise and the consternation of many of the clergy, because he had a very conservative reputation, and he had aligned himself with a very repressive government, especially with those who work with social justice, found it difficult to see him as the Archbishop and leader of God's way. One day, his friend, Father Rutilio Grande, was assassinated. He was a priest who worked in the hills, worked in another department outside of El Salvador. He was assassinated because of his work with the poor and teaching the people that they had rights. They had a right to food, they had a right to security, they had a right to a good living and safety. Archbishop Romero looked at Father Grande in his tomb, and he said, if they, referring to the repressive government, killed him for what he did, then I too have to walk the same path. On March 24, 1980, while saying Mass and at the elevation of the chalice, when he raised the chalice and said, "This is my blood given for you," he was shot in the heart. Because he was the heart righteousness and justice for the people of El Salvador. Symbolic killing. Pope Francis has just unblocked his canonization process. But when I look at all three of these, I ask, where did they start? For each of these people, the turning point in their lives was when they recognized that the Eucharist was the source and summit of their life. When they began to recognize and they understood that the conviction of their lives overflowed into the everyday areas of their life because they were the body and blood of Christ. It wasn't a generic form of Christianity. It was an understanding that the transformation of their lives was so configured with the transformation of the body and blood of Christ that they were able to go out and transform the world, even at the cost of their lives. When I look at their faith, it enables my own faith to become a challenging possibility for my conviction and my way of life. Through Dorothy Day, I recognize that there is nothing that anyone can do that will separate them from the love and the forgiveness of God. With Andrea Riccardi, I recognize that there is nothing impossible that we can do if we set our minds to it and allow God to work through us. And when I look at Archbishop Romero, I recognize the tremendous cost of living our faith and being faithful to it. But there's sometimes that, like the apostles in the reading today of the gospel, that we feel powerless. Sometimes just unable to do the things that we want to do. St. Paul says we know what we need to do, but sometimes we just don't do it. Philip and James, they could not see beyond the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, or the 6 months' wages that it would cost to feed all those people. As one writer has said, the most challenging line in the gospel is, give them some food yourselves. Our world population is at 7 billion, and more than 100 babies come into this world each minute. In that same minute, 3 die of starvation. Most people who die of starvation are children. Their little eyes closing at a rate of 180 per hour, 4,320 per day. It adds up to more than 1.5 million deaths per year from starvation, let alone all those whose lives are terminated prior to birth. Again, across the centuries, Jesus says to us, says to all of us, give them some food yourselves. And so many times we just respond, we don't have enough. I don't have enough. On this Feast of Corpus Christi, the gospel isn't about sharing the little about what we have, but rather it's about being able to see what happens when God's power is at work in our lives. What would happen this week if we put the Jesus factor to work? Well, what is the Jesus factor? It's counting on His presence and power in our lives, so that we will trust that as we gather here today, this morning, we are asking the Spirit to transform ordinary bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ today. But we also trust, as a people gathered together, as a Catholic community, that the Spirit will transform ordinary men and women like us into the real presence of Christ in the world tomorrow. God bless you.